they approved the measure to take out Al-Qaeda once and for all 1 week to the day before 9/11. So for us, I'm hearing about this. 9/11 happens, and then they're telling us on the TV, we think it might be this Osama bin Laden, and he's part of the Al-Qaeda network. That's the first time I ever heard of Al-Qaeda. That's the first time I guarantee you 90% of the United States ever heard of Al-Qaeda was on September 11th. So if you gave a poll out, so when did we decide to go after Al-Qaeda? They'd probably say September 12th or maybe October 7th, right? That's when we go into Afghanistan. If you had an option on there, now I put one on my page, but obviously most people have watched Codex 9/11 on my page, and it is half and half between September 12th and September 4th. But if you just put that on a regular poll, people will know nothing about September 11th. September 4th would have 0 votes. So you're telling me they approved this to go after evil Al-Qaeda 1 week before 9/11? That's mind-blowing to me. To me, that's one of the biggest things ever.
Hey, Danielle Walker here. I'd love for you to check out my online boutique, Lux Lion. My mission for Lux Lion is to showcase innovative African designers and sustainable mission-driven brands. To do that, I bring you stunningly beautiful handcrafted jewelry and accessories from some of my absolute favorite places on earth. Small batch wholesale for storefronts is also available. Join me in celebrating African artistry and shop now at luxlion.us. Use promo code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your purchase. Welcome to For the Love of Freedom. Today is Wednesday, September 10th. It's 10 a.m. Central Time, and I am coming to you live on Voice of the People USA TV and radio network on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Facebook. Wherever you're watching or listening, please like it, share it, leave comments. It helps me out so much. I am your host, Danielle Walker, and on this show we meet people who have rejected the status quo, have broken with convention, and each in their own way are working to bring freedom to the world. Joining me today on the eve of the 24th anniversary of the horrific attacks of 9/11 is someone who has perhaps spent more time researching and analyzing the events of that day than anyone else. He's dug into the people involved, the government agencies and corporations connected to it, the physical infrastructure impacted, the cash flows, and a whole lot more. I am so honored to have Brad Zerbo with me today. He is the writer and producer of the newly released documentary called Codex 9/11. Welcome to the show, Brad. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's the conversation, like you said, on the eve is the perfect time to have it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Well, Brad, I always like to start out the show with by framing it with a scripture. And the scripture for today is Psalm chapter 9, verse 16. So I'll just read that. And it says, I think it's so appropriate for today. It says, "The Lord is famous for this. His justice will punish the wicked. While they are digging a pit for others, they are actually setting the terms for their own judgment. They will fall into their own pit." And then it says, "Consider the truth of this," and pause in his presence. And I just want to make that a prophetic decree over the victims, the families, the first responders, and really the whole nation. This passage is a promise of the Lord that he will bring justice and he will judge the wicked. And this morning I'm declaring that the events and the personal and mass trauma caused by 9/11 will see justice, because to date we haven't seen it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I would call that the boomerang effect. A lot of the things they do seems to, especially in the last however many years, seems to be boomeranging back on them, and they set the precedent for their own demise.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Brad, for those in my audience who don't know you, would you introduce yourself and give some color to your surveying and building engineering background?
Sure. I'm I guess a researcher, investigative journalist, but originally my original profession is in surveying, detailing, and layout engineer for skyscrapers in Manhattan. I started that in 2002, February of 2002, and I started these two I guess legs of my life did overlap for a while from 2017 to the end of 2019, but now a full-on researcher and I guess now podcaster for the last couple of years as well. But I used to be more just kind of formal digs and pre-made content like you guys saw with Codex 911. And it's digging into basically this crazy world and a lot of the different things that have been sort of coming out these last 8-9 years. It is passion of mine, but specifically the September 11th attacks, I think are an extra passion of mine. One, because of what I did. I built skyscrapers in Manhattan for 17 years. And also, too, because it was my backyard. I grew up, born in New York City, grew up in New Jersey, right over the water. And those attacks, they affected the whole world. They obviously affected the country to a great degree, but the New York City area and the obviously in the surrounding areas around it, man, that trauma didn't leave for years. It was there, it was in everyone's face for a long time. And then, like you're saying, you touched on just a moment ago, every single year they make sure they re-traumatize you with it. So I take a personal offense to that more than anything. And also I take personal offense to the fact that, and this is also on me a little bit, that I did buy the narrative in the very beginning for a while. It's not something that I actively questioned or thought about. So it's not like I was just continually rebuying it, but they hit you with that trauma right away. You're instantly bonded to it. You instantly accept it because when you're in that state, you're kind of just in a state of taking everything in. And I feel personally, I guess, called to really push back on that because that's something that they did to me and my friends. And the wars, I very much supported the wars. I basically, your typical New York mentality. You want to just punch someone in the face immediately after that and continually. And when I look back on it, it's all so gross to me.
Yeah, it's absolutely disgusting. And maybe would you tell us a little bit about the name of the film, Codex 911, why you chose that name and what it means to you?
Yeah, also kind of, I like to dig into many things, as I'm sure yourself does. And as a researcher, you get pulled in different directions. There was a couple of years where I was doing kind of a personal dig, nothing I've put anything out on the Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, and it's all very fascinating to me. And then just the different manuscripts and how they may have been manipulated over the years, or maybe things have been manipulated and taken out over the years, and all that. So the idea of a codex, like an ancient manuscript, kind of stuck with me when I was looking for a name, and I just felt like, oh, Codex 911. And it kind of, not that it's an ancient manuscript, so I guess it's not an exact one-to-one, but just that I was trying to put together a manual for 9/11. I did two things here. There's the dig that I've been working on for years and years and years, right? Since November of 2017, when I was first tasked to even question 9/11, when just ask questions that made me think, oh man, 9/11 too. And then I started looking into it and the floodgates open. There's so much information that I can't believe. They're not going to give it to you, right? But it's there if you start looking. And that was especially before they started really locking up the internet. We had kind of a little bit of a head start. And so I have the dig and the information, right? But also what I tried to do was make it a manual. So one thing people will notice should notice anyway when you're watching it, I tried to make it pausable, where you can pause and take a screenshot and have all the information you need on the screen. Oh, you want to know where such and such that I'm talking about? Pause the screen. There's the PDF. There's the official thing in the corner. There's the page. Here's the exact paragraph. Because what's something I see with a lot of documentaries, and anywhere from your typical Discovery Channel documentary to even a lot of truther documentaries, is there'll be a shot of the towers while they say all these things, and maybe it's true. And maybe it's not. A lot of times they're vetted depending on the quality of them, and you consider true. But it's like, where did you get that from? It's just at this point, something someone's saying. So I try to really make it one visual, but also two, kind of like a manuscript that people can go back to and stop and go get the receipts to show someone or do their own digs and spider off it.
The sourcing is incredible, and the way that you walk us through what happened, I think, was so helpful, because I mean, I haven't believed for a number of years, certainly not as far back as 2017. But when I started my own, awakening, 9/11 was kind of in the mix of things that you start to question about reality. But I had never dug into it enough to really understand what it was that happened. If you were to characterize 9/11 for someone who knew nothing about it, how would you describe it to people?
It's funny because I feel like there's probably, well, everyone knows 9/11 or feels like they know 9/11, right?
Right.
As far as what you and I perceive, and I guess many others growing as time goes on, as what really happened 9/11 is, it was I almost feel like it's their perfection of Vietnam, because in the Vietnam, they sort of had this ongoing conflict. A lot of politicians made their careers on, a lot of people made money on that, sort of went nowhere. They'd take a hill one day, they'd give it back the next. And it was the beginning, I think, template of the forever war. And I don't think they were happy that it ended when it did, because again, there were a lot of things done. A lot of people made a lot of money. A lot of the military industrial complex was ran from it, but it was also horrifying. So what they were able to do in the Middle East with the 9/11 attacks is, instead of having a specific target, although this target was Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda allegedly, the real overarching target was terror. They gave us a broad spectrum target that wasn't specific, that they can just do indefinitely. We still have troops in the Middle East. This is 24 years later. Tomorrow will be 24 years since the day. And, October 7th will be 24 years since we officially went into Afghanistan. And I think that was probably the big plan. I touch on this at the very end, although I did try to keep my speculation as low as possible on this. But it was the grand opening to run amok on the world stage. You were just fighting terror. You can pretty much go anywhere you want. You can have different agencies running clandestine activities under the cover of military operations, and anything you can do. And a lot of people made a lot of money. A lot of politicians made their careers, but also the psychological effect of what they did to us, and even just the ongoing war and all this. I think it was kind of it was a crippling of society, an excuse to take away our freedoms, but also kind of a mental crippling of people. And I think you could look at it's a complete change. If you look at the attacks and I think about growing up in the 90s, what it felt like the freedoms, even though it was
Yeah.
already getting changed if you look historically. But if you look at the freedoms, the way we treated each other and the way we acted, as opposed to, say, you jump to the 2010s and the whole world was changed. And I think that was the key to it.
I think so too, because fear divides.
Yep.
And if you traumatize people and cause them to be suspicious instead of having a neutral first react, instead of their opening being neutral, it's already fearsome. Then how can you, you're already accomplishing what you want to do by you separate people emotionally and personally, and then
Exactly.
your job's so much easier as an evil person.
Yeah, I think it made everything very, well, we better elect the right person. Or what if another 9/11 or another bad thing happens? And it
Yeah.
made everything very important. But I think they obviously use that against us, the way they used our patriotism against us as well. I
Yeah.
feel very much triggered by that when I think about it too. Because I mean, one of the beautiful things that happened after 9/11 was New York. There were patriotism and flags and unity everywhere. And that was a brief moment, born out of a horrible event, that actually
Yeah.
was beautiful. And they took that. I mean, they were counting on it. I assume anyway. They took that and said, "Well, now we got to get them," and then headed off onto this trail of horror and war and how many people. You talk about people. A lot of people focus on how many people died in the attacks. How many of our bravest soldiers were
That's
sent to
right.
die in the Middle East? Or again, how many people in the Middle East were killed during this? And it's one of those things where everyone on all sides has been manipulated, even the people over there, right? And so we talk about, I've had soldiers, I've heard them, not even necessarily to me, but just over the years of study, and I've seen people who have kind of awoken to what seems to have happened with the attacks, and they feel like they wasted their service. But I kind of feel like that's missing the point a little. It's almost like, well, the monster's there. We could talk about who created the monster and had our hand in the radicalization over there, and kind of creating this boogeyman. But once the monster's there, you do need heroes to stop it. Then we can move on to, hey, wait a second, you guys created this monster? That's a different conversation. But
Yeah.
if you don't have heroes to go stop it, they let us steamroll us, I believe, anyway. I mean, they're always trying to knock us down. I think a major, and this is just my own theory here, but I think a major goal of a lot of the people who pull the strings is to knock the United States of America down to a third world nation, a much more controllable third world nation, like you see that they've done. They're really working towards it in Europe right now, but they've done it in a lot of different areas across the world. And I think our Constitution, specifically the Bill of Rights, really hinders that in America, and it kills them. So
Yeah.
erosion of freedoms, anything to knock us down and get us to fight with each other. I think those are overarching goals of a lot of these type of situations.
And who would you characterize as behind this? Because you say they did this and they sent, the soldiers there. You outlined some specific people in your film, but do you want to talk a little bit about who and the kinds of people that might be behind it?
Yeah, again, a lot of it's speculation. I tried to keep it low, my speculation low in the film, but the fun is we get to talk about it here then, right?
That's right. You can speculate away right here.
And so, I mean, in a broad sense, I am a subscriber to the global cabal theory of people kind of, they do run different deep state factions. This one I ascribe, it's funny, a lot of people, they ascribe 9/11 to the Israeli deep state. I think they definitely helped for sure. I think there's evidence of that. And there's even things that weren't in this where, they called them the dancing Israelis who were arrested. And I think that at least shows foreknowledge. I don't know if that says that they 100% did it, but I think they helped. But really, the American deep state, and again, it's a global thing to me, and I think the American deep state and the Israeli deep state, and that, you know, you talk about things in the United Kingdom, they have their
Yeah.
own deep state. They're really everywhere. Europe right now is being destroyed by people who are part of this cabal. But I think it looks to me anyway, as I think I've proven in this film, is a lot of it goes to the freaking CIA, our own CIA. A lot of it, kind of the neocon subsphere and things like the Project for a New American Century and things that are coming out of that. And again, it goes to a lot more agencies. You look at the aftermath with, again, it's so a familiar name to a lot of people out there right now, a Clapper, what they were doing in NIMA, and they kind of gave the keys to go into Iraq with the WMDs, and you just look at it. It looks like the FBI with Mueller certainly was, I believe, involved. And again, I don't believe these agencies as a whole are involved. There's lots of good people, I assume, in all of these agencies, but it goes back to something. I don't know if you're familiar with Edward Bernays, the writings of him. So he was Freud's nephew, and he wrote the book called Propaganda. And there were a lot of different tenets from that book. And he's not a no one. Woodrow Wilson had him in his World War I propaganda council. So he is attached very much to our world. He is one of the people who ran the fluoride campaign to get fluoride in the water in the 50s.
And we're still fighting that.
Yes, exactly. So this guy is mired in even more things a lot in our world. Joseph Goebbels literally cites his book Propaganda as where he got the group dynamics to run a lot of his propaganda campaigns during World War II. And he talks about group dynamics, and he talks about the idea of you don't have to compromise an entire group. All you have to do is compromise a couple big names at the top, or to get a couple of your guys in there, and they can sway entire groups to where these people don't even necessarily know 100% if they're involved in some sort of nefarious goings. And basically you can move the world just by getting into certain groups. So it seems like they have their people embedded. I mean, big shocker. And CIA, the FBI, you go into things again like NIMA, there's even other agencies that, again, they had it, like the agency that runs our spy satellites had a event scheduled where a mock drill where planes were going to fly into one of their buildings on September 11th. That's confusion right there. That's specific. So that's, I believe it was the American deep state that was the head of the snake of 9/11, but I do think there was help from their buddies abroad as well.
Yeah. It's so sick. It's absolutely sick to think that people could do this to their own country, that they want to do this to their own country. I mean, the only thing that it is absolutely satanic, because they don't care about the lives spent. And then it's, to me, the only thing I can say is that it's an unquenchable thirst for power and money.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Complete control and power over the world seems to be it. I agree that it's satanic. Yeah, I'd say even, a lot of them, right? Luciferianism seems to be at the heart of a lot of this. I heard there's a truther that I feature at one point in the film, mainly because, boy, he pretty much called 9/11, or at least something was going to happen a couple of months before. But I've heard him break it down to the point of where it's like, you might not believe in the occult and that type of stuff, but they do. So for whatever reason, you should at least study it. Look at things like the Skull and Bones, right? A lot of that comes up because the Bushes were Skull and Bones. Even John Kerry, who ran against him in 2004. You have two former Skull and Bones members running for the same office. Almost, what does it matter at that point, right? Who wins? But you look into that stuff, you're like, well, that's just a fraternity. Maybe. Well, their initiations are very occultish, and they're initiated in a freaking casket with, people can look up what in titles, but these people are very much into the occult. You look at the things like Bohemian Grove, which,
Right.
like, oh, that's just a boys club that they go to. Oh yeah. Yeah, what did you do, Johnny, last week? Oh, I hung out, and we all hung out and drank and played YouTube videos. Yeah. You know what they did? They got together in black robes and burned an effigy. Like,
Yeah.
it's
At
not,
best.
you know what I mean? Like, the
Yeah.
people are like weird when you bring up this stuff, and you're like, listen, I think it's weird. Okay. I also agree that it's weird, but there's a cult type stuff all mired in this world. So I don't think, people kind of roll their eyes when you say, yeah, it's satanic or Luciferian. It's like, it's something. There is
Yeah.
the occult is very much involved in these people. And then I think that becomes to power and money, like you're saying, and they use our own money. They use our tax dollars to fund a lot of this. And I think that's
Yeah.
goes to a lot of was revealed with the USAID and a lot of things that money was going to, and then just across the board, a lot of the things they waste our tax dollars on, they're not wasting it. They're using it to fund our very demise and our very imprisonment, really.
Yeah. 100%. Now, in your film, the statistical impossibilities of some of the evidence you point out is absolutely staggering.
Yeah.
You walked us through very systematically the building collapses, not being normal, if or even possible, not even being possible.
Yeah.
You talk about a magic suitcase, and the pre-collapse reporting of Building 7. What was it that you learned first in your research that moved you? You talked about from believing the mainstream narrative, not really questioning it at all, to ultimately saying, wait a second, there's absolutely no chance this went down the way they told us.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple early ones, probably a little foggy of which I
Sure.
specifically learned first, but the passport that they found at Ground Zero, that one's unscathed. They found 4 passports, one in the magic suitcase. All of a sudden, you're finding all these passports. I don't know who decided this was going to be a thing, but it's probably stupid in hindsight. They found the magic passport and one in the suitcase. They found 2 allegedly at where Flight 93 crashed. The plane, there's only little tiny metal scraps this big. There's no big wings. There's no sections. There's no luggage anywhere. There's no bodies anywhere. But they found 2 passports. At least one of them, they burned half of it. But then, but specifically the 4th one that they found at Ground Zero, and it's just insane. And a little Easter egg there is that they specifically found it. I think it was Vesey Street. Well, whatever the north street of the complex is, I believe it's Vesey Street. And they specifically say that it was found on Vesey Street after the 2 planes, but before they collapsed. So when I'm talking about that video is video of, say, I think might have been WPIX or one of the local stations on Vesey Street after the attacks, before they collapsed. First of all, no one's even on the street. There's no one there. And there's littered trash everywhere. So someone's just walking down in Manhattan and be like, whoa, I know there's 100 pieces of trash here, but look at that specific square one. Let me pick that up. It's so ridiculous. And that is ridiculous in itself. But then just the fact that the whole plane explodes into this massive, it looks like a little nuke went off. Everything incinerated to dust except the passport. The passport survived. Where did it fly out of his top pocket right before they hit the building? Like, what are you trying to say here? Also, to another thing is that Flight 11 hits the building coming from north, going south. But they say they found that passport north, behind where it hit. So that means, boom, the fireball goes this way, projecting that way, but his passport went backwards. So there's just a whole bunch of things that it's nice to talk about too, because some of it, boy, I was trying so desperately to make it 2 hours, and one of the 2.5 hours was the compromise. But there were so many things that the original script I have 4 paragraphs on that turns into one line, like the magic passport. By the time I'm trying to, get through it without making a 17-hour documentary, right? But yeah,
Which you
the
might
passport.
ultimately have to do.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, one point you brought out was that Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden were recruited and trained by the CIA. Do you think the CIA directed Osama bin Laden, Freudian slip there, and Al Qaeda to plan attacks on U.S. targets, or was he just like a run of the mill terrorist? And like part of what I kind of envision is, so they train this guy, they train Al Qaeda, they say, they bring the CIA and you said Pakistani military in to train these guys, and then they just kind of let them go do whatever, but they make them out to be some kind of terrorist that's gunning for the US, even though maybe they're not. And then they
Yeah.
chase them down like dogs afterwards.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, it's kind of a pattern if you start looking into it over time, where we'll support some rebel faction and somewhere, and they'll get up and they'll do what they're going to do, and I think that's obviously real. You're right. The war against the Soviets was real in Afghanistan, and we got to stop that communism. I hate communism, but they used that as their excuse, right, to fund things and create terror all around the world. But so that is, I believe, real. And I don't know if it's like tying up a loose end or just making the most out of something multiple times. Because again, we helped, so we gave Saddam the chemical weapons that he used on Iran. And then again, Saddam comes the big bad guy. And again, I think some people, not yourself, is not obviously not what you're saying, but I've kind of gotten a little bit like, well, do you think Al Qaeda and Saddam and all these people are good guys? No, sir. I'm certainly not saying that. I don't even know how much of what you hear is real at this point,
Right.
or what's, Smith Mundact, or what's coming through the pipe. But I assume, especially life is very different over there, some of it's probably real, and I don't think any of these guys are Boy Scouts. But as far as Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, we funded the Mujahideen with an operation called Operation Cyclone during the Soviet War. Part of that was funding Osama bin Laden's main handler, Jalaluddin Haqqani, and the Haqqani network, who totally took Osama under his wing and helped them. And then of Osama's own admission, after this is all breaking up, says even the Americans themselves were training them, and that they were getting money from the Saudis, and the Saudis is who we ran our program to fund the Mujahideen through. The Saudis through Pakistan into Afghanistan. And so I don't know how much of it is, well, now we're going to use them, or if it's an opportunity, or say, all right, now we could just use them as the new bad guy. I think they're just looking for a new boogeyman at all times. And a lot of times it's twofold. You get to tie up your loose ends that you just wreaked havoc with for a decade, but also then you get to use them as your new boogeyman to do whatever you want. So you're almost quieting that. And it's like you gave someone a gun to do a murder. If you say the mafia, right, and they're using an outside contractor, and then all of a sudden, oh, we have to get this guy. He was talking about someone, and then they take that guy out because they want to tie up their loose end. They don't want anyone to talk or something. I assume it's one of those deals.
Yeah.
But again, who knows exactly how it's working? All I know is that it's quite interesting that we fund all these rebel groups, and then literally once whatever happens is done, well, then we got to get them because they're our enemy now. It happens too many times for it not to be a systematic script that they're following that works. It's something that works.
When I was starting kind of down this awakening path, it's so easy and it's just like human nature to want to be black and white about things. Like,
Yeah.
were they good or were they bad? And
Yeah.
and as you're talking, I was reminded of that book you mentioned, First In. I can't remember who wrote it. Stephen Cole maybe wrote that book. Was it the
Oh, it's
first
all
guy who went
Ghost Wars.
Ghost Wars?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the guy who went into Afghanistan first, I read that book at the time, and then as I looked back on it, I was like, well, he must have been a bad guy. But even as you kind of unpack this kind of detail over the course of your awakening process, you're like, there's a solid chance he thought he was doing the right thing. Like, there's a solid chance he
Yeah.
had no idea and was absolutely being used by those crooks, to to be a patriot. They use or leverage his patriotism and his call to duty and service against him, just like they have so many soldiers and so many first responders and.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that you say that with the everything being black and white. Everyone's a clear cut good guy or bad guy. They're like white hat, black hat. I think there's a lot of shades of gray. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of again, you could kind of use people, and maybe they're a little bad or a little suggestible, but maybe
Right.
not the arch villains that we think. And then there's probably people, there's a lot of good people. We're all imperfect, right? Where who can be maybe not as great as you want to believe, because no one's perfect. So I think there's lots of shades of gray, but I think there are definitely specific groups who do know what they're doing. I think there are
Yeah.
people who are 100% bad. As far as the book Ghost Wars, and I don't think that was necessarily bad or good. I think it's an honest dig into the
Yeah.
precursor to 9/11. But I think in doing that, he reveals a lot of stuff that when you look back on, you say, "What do you mean they were working on this? What do you mean? Oh, they were looking for Osama bin Laden for
Right.
years." Which is like, yeah, well, of course he did this and that. But then you start looking further, and it's like, well, the U.S. is Cole, that's another one that he's not charged with. When you start breaking down, and again, this is goes to what I was telling, what I was trying to put everything on the page on paper. You can start looking into their internal documents and say that they never fully, they were never able to peg that on him. This was basically their hunch, was that it was him and Al Qaeda, and then you go with it. And then even on the 9/11, they're talking about the USS Cole, or the embassy bombings are the ones they really do pin on him. But again, that's nothing new over there. There's a suicide bomb over there is pretty much what they do. When you get to the sophistication of 9/11, you're saying, hey, this guy who organized suicide bombers over in the Middle East was able to pull off the most sophisticated attack in freaking human history. When you look at all the moving parts of 9/11, that's when you start getting to the questions. So I think certain digs, like in Ghost Wars, and the precursors the of what the situations were going on in Afghanistan and working with people, and if I thought it was very one of the, obviously the thing I focus on from that book more than anything is them test the CIA and Air Force testing their drone technology, and obviously flying drone planes as drones, that's been around for 30 40 years. They've been able to do that, I think even more, back to maybe even the 60s, but they weren't able to fully do it. They had to have the control station at a takeoff landing that was obviously close enough, and so it was kind of became a localized thing. And then they tested it, and they ran those first drone flights fully from from the CIA, from CIA building right in Langley, Virginia, in Afghanistan. And that was, to me, when I heard that they had figured that out 1 year before 9/11, that this is like massive leap in what you can do with a drone plane right before what seems to be, if I believe they were drones that did 9/11. I feel like I at least made my case for that. that to me was almost like the missing puzzle, because then everything fits in. Operation Northwoods, everything lines up. They talk about the use of drone planes for it. When you look at, again, when you're digging into the amalgam Virgo, what are the two drone plane designations? 9 and 11. All of a sudden, it's like everything starts lining up. And then again, I felt one of the things I like about this is that I was able, when I was scaling them, how they all were coming up short. That was the real solidification for me. So that's something that kind of spidered out of a drone dig that led me to that book. And then that book kind of opened up a lot of things. And I don't necessarily think there was anything nefarious. I think it's an honest dig. But I think a lot of these things is you can look into a lot of the different digs into the different stuff and start putting the puzzle together. And I read a lot of books in the making of this. And again, none of them, most of them anyway, not specifically about 9/11, but about the things around it. There's a good book called The Iron Triangle about the Carlyle Group, and there's a whole wealth of information on them. But then there's the stuff that, well, boys, sure seems interesting when you put it in the context of 9/11. So yeah, I like what you're saying about maybe not everything touching the attacks is black hat or white hat. Some of it just kind of is parallel, I'd say.
What's interesting? So, in the context of the scripture from this morning and what you're saying, I think about after 9/11, actually, even before 9/11, I guess, the Middle East was figuring very large in the news way before 9/11. I was in college. I was a sophomore, junior when 9/11 happened. I remember my dad called me and told me that the Pentagon was struck. And I was like so stunned. I was standing at the bus stop and I was like, what do you mean? Like our Pentagon, our Pentagon? Like I couldn't even fathom what he would mean about a Pentagon being hit, especially not that one. But years later in my master's studies, I was studying Middle East politics and was really interested in this stuff. And so I was reading on my own, I think, some of these books that you brought up during the documentary. And at the time of reading those, like I'm remembering in your documentary, I'm remembering my reading of those books. I'm remembering my confusion in those books. I'm like, wait a second. So the 9/11 attackers were from Saudi Arabia. So the first CIA agent goes into Afghanistan and we go to war in Iraq. Why does this not make sense?
Right.
So crazy.
Yes, 1,000,000%. Especially, it's funny because Iraq seems to be one of the main targets. We do with Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, we do that first. But if you go back, and I'm sure you ran into a lot of this and what you're speaking of, they had been talking about going back to Iraq and taking care of Saddam once and for all throughout the entire 90s. And then again, Saddam was built up. Well, personal people wonder why he was left alive anyway in the first Gulf War. He was probably left alive to be used again. And then Osama bin Laden starts coming up, and these become the two boogeymen of the Middle East, all peppered out through the 90s. And there are things that, like I bring up the Project for a New American Century. They have open letters in 99 talking about the WMDs, and we have to go stop Saddam once and for all. And the only way to do it and save ourselves from the WMDs, which we helped give them, is for ground invasion. So this is years before Bush administration's even in. They're talking about it. I believe the figure was, I say it in the piece, I believe it was 14 members of the Project for a New American Century went on to be in the Bush administration. And again, a lot of them to this day, they are still kind of mired in world politics, and there's you look at stuff that happened, not to go on a huge tangent, but some of the stuff that went down in Ukraine that laid the groundwork for what we're dealing today back in the Euromaidan in 2014. And Victoria Nuland had a lot to do with that from the Obama administration. And she's married to Kagan, who was one of the people who started Project for a New American Century. And he's one of the specific people who wrote that open letter. I believe it was to the New York Times in 99. You're like, hey, they're on different sides of the aisle. There are no different sides. There's the,
exactly.
right, you know what I mean? There's the globalist cabal. We want to run the world and lock you down side.
Yeah,
and then there's patriots.
They just wear different color badges on their shirts. That's it.
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
So when you think about, okay, at that time, I mean, I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh with my dad. I was, through and through as Republican, conservative as you could get. Definitely, we needed to go to war. We had to get those guys, even though it was the wrong country and it didn't make sense. But you think back, some of my big heroes from that time, man, I had so much admiration for Condi Rice, for Colin Powell. I mean, I defended George Bush when that just makes my stomach turn now to know that I did that. When you look back at it, and I mean, Rudy Giuliani was a huge hero of mine and still is, and God bless him for living among the freaking sharks like that.
Oh, amen.
Do you think he knew? Like, here he is. I remember vividly the stories of him, like maybe getting 30 minutes of sleep per day in the months following 9/11. Like, the man was an absolute machine and a hero. Yeah. Do you think he knew that George W. was a piece of crap human being, like evil as it comes?
I don't. I don't think so. I kind of assume. I mean, living in this area through all that, it was the fog of just everything that had happened laid over this area for a long time. And again, I felt the same way. Everyone in the whole tri-state area, I see Giuliani. One thing people will say about Giuliani is the city of New York, but really FEMA and the EPA and a lot of people were really like, clean up as fast as possible, right? And so a lot of people try to heap that on Giuliani. I don't see it that way. I understand the act of getting the evidence out as fast as possible is suspicious. But again, knowing what Giuliani did in New York and what he did, and again, in the aftermath, he was, if you watch him, that's a mirror to how the whole area here felt. So basically, that was public mandate at that point. People came from every side of the city to clean up. People descended on downtown Manhattan and said, we're going to clean this up as fast as humanly possible and put it right back up as a screw you. That was public mandate. Giuliani was the face of that, but he kind of had no choice because that's what was being demanded. And again, I know people who went down there just from being in the construction world, and you meet a lot of people who were first responders, or they're down there. They were surveyors down there watching the piles. There were iron workers there cutting the beams and taking it apart, and the whole world was said, clean this up as fast as possible. And I wonder sometimes, speaking of Giuliani, because again, that's someone who I love, I wonder how much of it too was punishment for what he did. Because in the 80s, New York was like a lot of these cities where it was just beaten down. They had beaten down Chicago and Detroit, and all these cities had just been beaten down into these kind of really unsafe, destroyed versions of their former glory. But Giuliani is the only one who bucked the narrative, and he gets elected in the early 90s, and he revamps and just revitalizes all of New York. It's safe again. It's everything that, as we know what these people do, it's everything that they would hate to death. So I wonder sometimes if that was, if at least a little secondary yes for them was to knock that down a peg, was to punish Giuliani. So I wonder about that. But some of these other ones, again, I grew up very conservative and a Republican. I actually grew up in a house where my mom was Democrat, my dad was a Republican, and they were very cool and cordial about it. And they were very much like, well, you make up your own mind, and don't let yourself get turned in any direction. And 9/11 turned my mom into a Republican. That changed everything. And I love these people too. I'm very heartbroken about GW, although I know people, 9/11 has historically been pegged completely at his feet. I think he was a useful idiot, and I think his old man was a lot more involved, and again, CIA and stuff of that nature. And Dick Cheney, I think Dick Cheney's a lot more involved than people realize. But GW almost assuredly knew what was going on, and he has also helped it, and that's heartbreaking to me. As far as Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, again, then you just start getting into shades of how much did they know, how much didn't they know. I don't think necessarily every single person who was one shake away from 9/11 was explicitly involved in the planning of 9/11, but it's worth noting. So again, Colin Powell is very much tied to the Carlyle Group. He's one of those. Is everyone tied to the Carlyle Group? I mean, they're again, this is a part of the puzzle that certainly needs to be examined. Are they all part of Plan 9/11? I don't know, but it's worth noting. Again, and Colin Powell was very much a part of the impassioned speech to the UN for about the WMDs they all piggybacked off of, and then got us to go into Iraq. But he was also working with data that came from James Clapper's NIMR, and they looked over the satellite imagery, and I think it's like 150 or 900. I forget now. I don't have the number. It's really early, but hundreds of weapons of mass destruction facilities were identified in the satellite imagery. And then again, they had the mobile WMD trucks that they had heard inklings of from someone in Germany, and then they identified them. So James Clapper's NIMA identified them. They turned out to be milk pasteurization trucks, and they even made the graphics that Colin Powell is showing them are computer generated graphics that they made for him for that presentation. And then there was a whole group of them beforehand, who James Clapper being a main voice of, who first decided that yes, there are definitely WMDs. So some people are like, well, was he set up? I don't know, maybe. Was he involved? Some of those people, again, they're gray areas. I don't know how much who was involved or who wasn't. Condoleezza Rice in her deposition, again, kind of gives up the goat with it. So you could almost say, was that good? Who knows? So she could almost be a good guy in this. But again, I have trouble figuring out who explicitly was part of this planning and who knew. But in her deposition, I think one of the most damning things that really blew my mind during this dig was when she reveals and that it was the main plan was to go after Al-Qaeda for the whole Bush administration, for the whole year leading up to that. And people forget there wasn't an Al-Qaeda attack during the whole Bush administration. She quotes him and says, "We're tired of swatting Al-Qaeda like flies one by one. We gotta go after them in a big manner," right? Well, swatting flies, there were no flies to swat. There's not a single Al-Qaeda attack during your presidency. You could say, oh well, the U.S. cold, but again, internal documents show that they weren't sure. They were guessing that was Osama bin Laden. And before that, then if you take that out of the equation, it's been years. So, and again, this is years before he's even in office. So what do you mean? That's your number one policy. But okay, you can say, well, they are something. That's fine. But they approved the measure to take out Al Qaeda once and for all 1 week to the day before 9/11. So for us, I'm hearing about this. 9/11 happens, and then they're telling us on the TV, we think it might be this Osama bin Laden, and he's part of the Al Qaeda network. This is the first time I ever heard of Al Qaeda. That's the first time I guarantee you 90% of the United States ever heard of Al Qaeda was on September 11th. So if you gave a poll out, so when did we decide to go after Al Qaeda? They'd probably say September 12th or maybe October 7th, right? That's when we go into Afghanistan. If you had an option on there, now I put one on my page, but obviously most people have watched Codex 9/11 on my page, and it is half and half between September 12th and September 4th. But if you just put that on a regular poll, people know nothing about September 11th. September 4th would have 0 votes. So you're telling me they approved this to go after evil Al Qaeda 1 week before 9/11? That's mind blowing to me. To me, that's one of the biggest things ever. And that's Condoleezza Rice gives that up in her deposition. So,
yeah. Well, maybe, I pray it does all come out. I think, we will be seeing these people come before different panels, maybe congressional panels or otherwise in the months and hopefully not years from now ahead. But you're talking about hearing Al Qaeda for the first time. Let's talk a little bit about Project Mockingbird. And on this show, on the documentary, you show some MSM talking heads and reporters, and then one of them slips up. At least one of them slips up, probably more than one, and says a little bit ahead of time. The one lady, I think she may have been a foreign correspondent, talking about Building 7 before Building 7 even collapsed, before it looked like there was even anything going on with Building 7. What do you make of that? Because before you got to that point, I was like, wow, Project Mockingbird, it was in my mind because you see all these reporters kind of not really knowing what to say or do. And so I was like, well, maybe they just got the talking points the day after, except for this lady.
Right. Yeah, that's whoever put those out, whoever put out the World Trade Center 7 collapsing, jumped the gun. That's my take on that. And, I don't know if, again, a lot of people, they put it on her or they put it on the guy in the studio. They're talking heads, right? They're getting reports from people. I think there's people have said that came from an errant Reuters report that was inaccurate. Well, okay, so Reuters knew this beforehand that this building was going to come down, which is World Trade Center 7 coming down is the biggest mistake in false flag history. That I have my reasons to believe why they did it. Obviously, there were a ton of government agencies in there. People have talked about what different paperwork were in those buildings that could have been purposely destroyed. That the operating centers of who would take care of an emergency were also in there. So you're crippling that. But taking that down the way they did was just a huge mistake because, one, you have things like that where clearly someone jumped the gun and getting that information out there, and then it's out there. Like, what do you mean it's coming down? It's right behind you in the live shot. But two, it wasn't hit by a plane. It's a massive skyscraper. It was less than 15 years old at that point. So that's pretty much a brand new building in any American city, 15 years old. New York City, I worked building skyscrapers in New York City. They have the most stringent building codes there ever are, and fireproofing and everything to the hilt. And this thing, because of fires on the lower floors, just totally collapsed. Like, what are you talking about? That's insane. So doing that in general was a mistake, but they were good in the way that it's kind of been swept under the rug, because there are a lot of people to this day who are like, what do you mean a third building went down? They don't even know.
Right.
They purposely don't talk about it. But the bigger mistake is the foreknowledge. The foreknowledge that was going to come down. Whoever jumped the gun with that 4 a.m. talking point, or I guess probably 4 p.m. at around that time talking point, definitely messed up. And they messed up by going with it. But I'm sure they don't know. They're reporting every single thing that's coming into them as is coming in. that is a glaring mistake in the whole scheme of that day.
Would you talk a little bit more about, one, tell us what a false flag is in your view, and two, because I think some people think it means it didn't happen, right? And we know that's not what it means.
Yeah,
And
no.
then, would you talk a little bit about the nefariousness of collapsing Building 7 because of all of the entities that were in there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely a huge misconception that people will take as when you declare something as a false flag as it was totally fake and the reporting on it is as fake and everything that they said happened it didn't actually happen. Definitely not. Well, I mean, maybe there are cases of that, right? If you were to go through every single one, who knows? I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin that kind of gave them the permission to escalate troops in Vietnam and essentially start Vietnam. That never happened. So technically, that's a fake version. But for the most part, most of these, when you say false flag, it's just being who did it is being misrepresented. It goes back to the old pirate days where they didn't, we picture pirates with a skull and crossbones flag on, but yeah, they would sometimes, something to do is they'd put on a country flag and they'd attack. They'd say we were attacked by France, right? And so it's a false flag attack. That's the spirit of the name of it. And so basically, it's something that happened that is being used to set someone up who didn't do it. So false flag at 9/11, it's set up these networks who, again, and not necessarily good networks, but if they didn't actually do 9/11, then we shouldn't be going after them. They didn't really earn what happened. That shouldn't happen. So false flag is a setup, essentially.
Yeah.
There's a great documentary that I would suggest to your audience of 2015 called Shadow Ring. It's actually narrated by Kevin Sorbo, who played Hercules.
Okay.
Remember?
Uh-huh.
And it's great. I personally haven't watched it in years, probably in almost as long, but that they do a great breakdown of false flags in that, and pretty much talking about the old pirate ships and stuff. But then they go through a lot of different ones, and the ones that I also touch on in this differently. But that's a great documentary. I would suggest that people watch. They also have a great part in there about the Council on Foreign Relations, which a lot of people feel like is kind of an end to get there for these people who we kind of feel like lord over the world and run these operations to get their people in. And it's kind of this think tank where many people from both sides of the political aisle seem to all come from. And it's a revelation in there. I think Ben Swan is the reporter talking about how when he was covering I think it was when Obama was going against Romney. But again, it's been almost 10 years since I watched it. And he's talking about how he saw Romney kind of like looking to someone off camera as he's interviewing him to kind of give him the, I guess, okay to answer certain questions or what to say almost. And afterwards he inquires about this and he goes, well, that's, his representative from the CFR. And then he dug into the CFR and finds out, well, they all got representatives from the CFR, but they're fighting against each other. Again, it goes back to the Skull and Bones, the 2004. So yeah, that's a good documentary that goes into that. But they have a cool little false flag section that breaks that down, which I love. So
Brad,
I was just watching that. Yeah.
a small tangent. When I was in DC, I applied to CFR because they were like, pretty renowned, but they rejected me. So I guess I stand to be grateful for that.
Yeah, there's another great, there's a congressman named Larry McDonald who he kind of, in 1984, he gives this really, that's another great clip. You should look, people should look that up of him talking. He was on, I think it was on a CNN program. He's talking about the Council on Foreign Relations, and I was started by Edward Mandell House, and he's mentioning a lot of things, but kind of, again, talking about the cabal long before a lot of us were talking about the cabal.
Wow.
And he curiously died in a plane crash right after that. He was accidentally shot down, his plane, not long after that interview. But he makes a good point in that, in where he states that there were good people in the CFR. And, again, it goes to a lot of these organizations that we're talking about. There are lots of good people in a lot of these organizations, but the overarching heads of these, or the goals of a lot of these operations, which is set by the few on the top, are for the CFR. He put forth, and I really believe what you're looking for is to slowly erode our freedoms and push us towards the socialist left. And you could see that the famous clip with Biden, where he's saying, "Oh, son of a bitch, he got fired." And the real quid pro quo that they impeached Trump on, where he's bragging about it, that's at a Council on Foreign Relations meeting. So there are a lot of reasons to think that these places, they're kind of the engines that get their people in, and they could kind of pepper out their assets in different places.
Yeah. Now get into, if you don't mind, Building 7 for people, just maybe an overview of that, because it's something that's kind of come back into the consciousness of people. I think there's this famous moment where Barron Trump was wearing a shirt that said, "Ask me about Building 7."
Really?
And yeah, I think it was a couple years ago. I'll try and find it for you.
I
But
love that. I would love to
yeah.
see that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think Barron's probably more read in than people think. One, if you hear like Eric and Don talk, boy, they have their finger on the pulse too. I think people sleep on them, or maybe not. I don't know, but Building 7. This is why Building 7 is the craziest. It's not like it was some little building. You're talking about a 47-story skyscraper, again, in the heart of Manhattan, with the highest building regulations of all time. It was a lot of the buildings around there were damaged from the collapses, right? So after the building 1 and Tower 1 and 2 collapse, World Trade Center 7, they have fires on the lower floors. Eventually, around 5 p.m., Building 7, as predicted by the BBC, and also you have there's also film of, I think, firefighters telling people, "Go back, the building's about to come down," which is a little interesting, because then there's also first responders say, "I heard them say over the radio 1, 2, 3," and then the building comes down. Why did they know that building was going to come down? From just fires that were going on. You know how many freaking fires there are in office buildings across the United States, specifically in New York. Someone, when you guys, your audience, get a chance, start Googling how many fires there are a year in Manhattan. It's insane. And so this just completely, fully collapses like a controlled demolition in front of everyone's eyes at around 5 p.m. that night. And NIST comes in, and they do the official investigation. And they're saying, "Yeah, a fire." Well, the fire must have heated up. They say their claim is that a fire heated up girder A 2001, and it kind of walked it off its column seat. It collapsed, and then the whole building collapsed. Okay, which for anyone who builds buildings, is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, the way they act as if it's a Jenga tower, and it's only the bare bones skeletons. That's not the case. It collapsed onto a concrete floor. Okay, so for it to shear the connection of the beam below it, which is what would happen, right? Which is basically saying it collapsed, and then it collapsed the beam below it. The A2001 on each floor collapses off of column 79 for over 8 stories, and then all of a sudden the building comes down. Well, it's not just hitting the beam below it, it's hitting a concrete floor below it, and it's falling about 15 feet. So first of all, the fact that wouldn't be contained, again, for people who build buildings out there, just picture one part of a floor coming down onto another in a localized area of the building that's just going to stay there. So that's it's kind of ridiculous, and they did a great breakdown. This is run out of the University of Fairbanks, uh, with three gentlemen. Leroy Halsey was the main runner of it, and they prepared it for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and they go through all these different things. They calculate the amount of force that it would take to shear the floor below, something like 600,000 pounds of force. And then they calculate the amount of force that those would have come down on, is something like 60,000. So it's not even a tenth of what would have collapsed the floor below it. It would have been localized. They start talking about going through the NIST report. The NIST report shows thermal expansion of the beams pushing on girder A2001 in only one direction. Obviously, thermal expansion expands out. So it would also be pushing against the outside, which means it wouldn't be going fully in one direction the way they say it would. They're saying that even if it did only go in one direction, you still have to increase the coefficient of expansion by 40% just to walk it off its column seat. And there's just for people, they're like, say you picture the column 79, right? And then there's a little seat that that girder A2001 is sitting on. It's also bolted and connected in many other ways, but they're saying it walked off. But it couldn't even, because then there's also in the plans, which wasn't involved, which NIST didn't include, there are side plates that are also stopping here. So even if it's walking a little bit, it's going to butt up against that side plate. So there's many more. And again, I go through it. I tried to animate it. This is one of my favorite parts of the thing, because as a detailer and someone who worked in buildings, I understand those drawings, and I was able to try and make them make more sense to the layman who doesn't know about steel drawings. And basically they totally destroy any semblance of what NIST is trying to explain may have happened there. Then they start running simulations, and the only way they can get the building not to tip over or to even resemble what we observed on that day in many videos is by destroying all the interior columns, and then just a second later all the exterior columns over 8 floors at the same time. And then that's the only thing that brings their simulation down at the way that we watch, which is that's actually more of a traditional controlled demolition from the bottom up. But what seems to be with the towers, it looks like they were leading the collapse, which is actually would be kind of reverse of a regular controlled demolition, which is, I think that was purposely done like that. But World Trade Center 7 is even more traditional. The bottom falls out. You can watch the whole thing drop all at once, perfectly into its own footprint. It's just crazy. First of all 3 of them combined should be looked together. That this happened 3 times. If one of those buildings collapsed, it would have been crazy enough, like, oh my gosh, and then Tower 2 actually collapsed afterwards. Holy shit, really? Excuse me, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
That for all 3 of them to fully collapse straight down, even though they're all damaged in different ways. You're talking about damage on the 11th or 12th floor, a fire on the 11th, 12th floor of Building 7. You're talking about the whole pretty much dead center on the 93rd floor of Tower 1. And then you're talking about a diagonal hole on the side of the 78th floor of Tower 2. Yet they all fell the same way. And so that in itself makes no sense. Building 7 wasn't hit by a plane. The people had reported bombs going off inside the building of World Trade Center 7 as they were going up. That's another thing they don't talk about. It makes 0 sense for this skyscraper to fully collapse like that due to a fire that was started from the collapse of the other buildings. And I think for them, it was a mistake to bring that down, because it's so... You could barely explain the towers coming down with the planes and gaping holes in them. That in itself, if you just think of physics, makes no sense that this much crushed this much, right? And then
Yeah.
it was able to just pulverize it all the way down. That makes no sense. Even when you get into Newton's third law of physics, it makes no sense. And that had a gaping hole in it and was blasted with something. This building has fires on it. If that's the case, well, then every friggin' building in every city in the world is in danger. If an office fire, it can just fully collapse the whole building, one shot straight down. So World Trade Center 7, I say there was an absolute mistake on their part, and that's why they don't talk about it. That's why they never mention it in any of their specials, or very quickly. They don't want people thinking about a full-fledged skyscraper coming down that wasn't hit with a plane.
Does it even feature in the Freedom Towers at all? I mean, is it a part of the 9/11 area?
It's across the street from the main. I actually worked on the rebuilding of World Trade Center 7 back in like
Wow.
03 or 04 or something like that. It's if you have, I guess you say like this is just a box. Like this is the World Trade Center, a site. Right across the street is World Trade Center 7. And so yeah, pretty much you can see it's a square silver building right behind. If you're looking from south to north, it would be right behind the Freedom Tower, or if you're looking from north to south, it would be in the foreground of the Freedom Tower. So yeah, the new World Trade Center 7 is one of the ones that went up. I also worked on the foundation for World Trade Center 2. There was supposed to be a second tower that went up that had diamonds at the top that they capped at the first floor, or they capped it off right there. I guess they lost funding at some point for that. Mm-hmm. That was supposed to go right next to the Freedom Tower. And then there's buildings 3 and 4. Is 3 and 4? I believe then there's 2 more buildings in that complex on the back end of it. Yep. So I guess the 4 buildings went back up. Yeah.
Okay. I remember back to, and I think you put this in the documentary, Donald Rumsfeld, when he was Secretary of Defense, giving that pretty, I guess, kind of famous or iconic speech saying we lost $3 trillion. And then I think that was like the day before 9/11, or maybe the Friday before 9/11. Do you think that has a direct bearing on what happened to Building 7?
I think more so the Pentagon than Building 7, but who knows? Again, people speculate. They'll talk about different documents that they believed were being housed in Building 7. But the Pentagon, so he announced that it was the day before, September 10th, $2.3 trillion in transactions that had no paper trail. And so this money went out. It was used for something, and it had no paper trail. He announces this on September 10th. September 11th, the specific part of the Pentagon that was hit was the Budget Analyst Office. The people who were looking for the $2.3 trillion are who died at the Pentagon that day. And so it's either the greatest, I call 9/11 the greatest series of coincidences in human history. It's either another miraculous coincidence, because then no one ever hears about that 2.3 trillion ever again, not from their end anyway, or it was just fortunate for them, I guess, in a weird way. But how has that happened? It's just interesting that that's the exact spot of the Pentagon that was hit, and I believe it was hit by a missile. Again, that I don't go into what it may or may not be in the documentary, because there's next to nothing to analyze. There's a couple frames of a white blur. I think specifically there's 2 different videos. One has 2 frames of it, one has 1 frame. So 3 single frames of something that hit the Pentagon. They claim, oh, this is proof it's a plane. I think it's proof of nothing. You can't tell. It's proof of a ghost, because it looks like it's a white streak. And so I don't really go into it, but if you look at the hole, you can make a case that it was a missile. It was a singular hit. And that's what I personally think happened, which would mean that they announced that this money was gone, and the very next day, the people who were looking for it got blown up.
That is so beyond sick. And it does make you wonder if this was
Yeah.
like a an afterthought. They're like, well, we're already going to blow other stuff up, so what's one more thing?
Yeah, might as well. Yeah, let's take care of the. You care if we take out this too? Take care of this, sure. Yeah, I wonder how many things are heaped on, because again, with these big operations, it does seem like they try to kill as many birds with one stone as they can. It's who knows, but yeah, that's that is one of the biggest glaring crazy nodes to 9/11 story for sure.
And going back to the drone planes that you believe and make a very strong case for hitting the two towers. And then you think about Shanksville, which is its own weird situation. What do you think happened to the passengers of the real flights? Do you think they just took them off somewhere and like murdered them all? Or do you think they're like basically hostages still? I mean, what's going on with
I
those
have to
people?
assume they murdered them. I don't think there's any way, especially something this big, that they let any of them go. No one's ever heard from any of them. Say they seem very much dead. They also, with the cell phone calls that they made, they pretty concerned, pretty convinced that they landed those planes. I think it's just crazy to think that those calls have all the earmarks of cell phone calls that were made from the ground. And even more so that I go into it, there's even more people who cite their caller ID that know it was a cell phone. There's more people in depositions who say there was minimal background noise. And then there's the famous CC Lyles who says it's a frame, whispers it's a frame at the end
Yeah.
of hers. So I think those were made under duress. I don't know, if it was straight up gun to their head or people in suits walk in, say, we have a situation, we need your help. And they get these people to say whatever and then take them out. But yeah, a lot of people, that is probably the most asked question I've gotten. And again, I don't say anything in there because it's just speculation on my part, but I
Yeah.
have to believe they were taken out. And especially an operation that big. I've heard people suggest that they were landed in a certain hangar and that they gassed them in that hangar. That goes speaks to a lot of the things with a lot of these things where people just say stuff, and I don't know if there's would ever be documentation of it anyway, but I don't know how true or not that is, but that's what I think anyway.
And the special ops guys that were on the planes, one of the pilots was a special ops, and supposedly one of the passengers in one of the flights you call out as being Israeli special ops. Do
Yeah.
you think they made it out and they're living some other life?
If for in that case, I think there were probably assets on each one of those planes who are still alive, living under a different alias, or at least lived after 9/11 under different aliases. Again, that's my speculation on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Catherine Herridge put out a report yesterday, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but she is reporting that there were Saudi government employees who may have served as an advance team to the hijackers. She goes into the fact that they lived in San Diego. They were probably harbored by some other people. I mean, based on what you have researched, I mean, what are the chances that the commercial flights were even hijacked in the first place by the Saudis? And then was any of it, in your view, even done were the Saudis implicated at all? And what do you think about this idea of an advance team?
Yeah, I haven't dug specifically into her reports. I do love her reporting,
Yeah.
typically. As far as the 9/11 stuff, I think a lot of it's cooked. A lot of the things that are going to come out are cooked. As far as the Saudis, there was MBS purge in 2017 that some people think might have some of this faction that he went after could have ties back to 9/11. Ben Talal obviously has ties back to at least the Carlyle group, and so is it touching on that a little bit? Because as far as the planes, I think they were probably fake hijacked and then landed. That's my theory. I think those people could very well have been on those planes. Maybe there are also people who talk about the original list of passengers that original flight logs. They say they don't include any of the alleged hijackers on them. So that's another rabbit hole you can go down. But I think they were used as assets. This is again what I touch on from Michael J. Springman and then other people where they were talking about the visa program that they were using for Operation Cyclone was being run through the Saudi Arabia offices, mainly in Jeddah,
right.
but also in Riyadh. And this is during the 80s when it was happening, and it says it continued into the 90s. They were getting them their visas through there, sending them to the United States, training them, and then sending them to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. And these were their Arab assets. And they had went around and recruited all throughout the Middle East Arabs to fight that war. And this was another part of the Operation Cyclone. They had also had a lot of propaganda that they had worked with different governments to spread out there to get them ready to want to join the fight with the Mujahideen. And so things were being run out of Saudi Arabia. They seem to be run through our CIA seemed to have the most to do with it. But I could see a negative, I guess, black hats or shades of black hat and in the Saudi government that could have been involved with them, working with them. They have their people everywhere. And maybe it's touching on that. I wonder. I would like to dig into the report. But as far as it's being presented from what I could see anyway, the little bit I saw, at least the I guess the teaser that she put out, whether yesterday or the day before, it seems to be under the precursor that the hijackers were real and what happened was real. And that part of the story, I do not buy. So I don't know. Is it a piece? It could totally be a piece to the puzzle, and it could be a piece to these assets. But yeah, I think they were used as assets, and I think the whole thing was a setup, and they were either not on the planes at all, or they were on the planes as part of the fake hijackings. That's my theory on the alleged hijackers, which 15 of the 19 came through Saudi Arabia, and that's where the Saudi Arabia connection comes from.
And if you think about the families that are suing the Saudi government, when this comes out, I mean, they got the wrong target, man.
They might, right? But again, it could be bad people who were in the Saudi government who were working with our CIA. John Brennan was a big one over there. He was the head station chief from 96 to 99, and the head station chief is basically runs all CIA operations in whatever country that he's the station chief. So he was running all CIA operations there. He was also in the early 80s during the heart of Operation Cyclone. He was also in the Jeddah office. This is the specific one that Michael J. Springman worked as the head of the visa department, where he said that they were pushing through these assets. And so yeah, you have to assume that there were some people involved in the Saudi government. As far as the current Saudi government, I don't actually like what Mohammed bin Salman has been doing. It seems like he's been cleaning things up and going after a lot of the bad factions.
Yeah.
So I don't know if if you're suing specifically them, that might be, like you're saying, the wrong targets. But again, if you can start pinpointing who it was, there certainly could be people in the Saudi government who at that time were involved. Yeah.
And I just lost my thread for a second there. When you think about the RICO case that has probably started, because you hear the names Brennan and Clapper more lately, with regard to Crossfire Hurricane and the Russia hoax. Does that get you excited about the fact that this is, I mean, it all roads point back to 9/11?
Yeah. It's interesting how that works, and it's interesting how God works, because I started working on this. I did another documentary. The one before this was I released in I want to say September of 2021. It was called Population Control. It was on the COVID-19 and a lot of all the shenanigans surrounding that and Event 201 and some of that. So it was after that, in the end of 2021, that I started at least writing this out. I had an earlier 9/11 dig that I wanted to turn into a full documentary. I released a 25-minute breakdown in 2019, and from between 2019 and 2021, I had amassed so much more of the full picture, and I had always wanted to make it. I wanted to make it into an hour-long version, right at that time, which then quickly grew to 2 hours, which wound up being 2.5 hours. So I started writing it out then. Over the course of 2022, I added to my dig. I was continually rewriting and writing and working on what, and just adding to it and working it out. And then I started putting it together as far as actually editing it and putting it together, which the dig continued throughout, but in January of 2023. Now, in my head, this was going to be done probably by mid 2023, the end of 2023, at very least 2024. And it was just so much. It kept going on. And again, the digs and in the mere fact of I wanted to have the evidence on file, on screen. Like I said, a lot of people in a lot of documentaries, they just say things, and it could be very true. Everything could be completely vetted and true. It's like you don't know. And I was just like, you know what? This is a dig and on video. In my heart of hearts, that's what it's. All my videos are. So I wanted to show. I want the people to be able to go back and pause and get all the information they need. So that in the mere fact of things that I have written out and I know they happened, like, all right, let me go find it to show on screen again. And I'm digging through my notes and digging through stuff. Then you run into all these other things, and it just kind of even grew to even bigger than it was over the course of those years. And it wound up, I didn't finish it until the summer of 2025, which winds up perfect because it's literally, I finished it right as all the Russiagate stuff is coming down on these people's heads, and they all have one foot in the 9/11 story. So it's just, God has a weird way of working out. I didn't plan to have that. Like I said, I had thoughts to have this finished a year earlier, but it just worked out in the most perfect timing ever that I couldn't in a million years even begin to take credit for. I also, again, a lot of my digs, well, I'll just run into things where, I'm looking obviously and I'm digging and I'm in the depths of stuff. There are just certain things where I'll search in a certain way, or I'll find something that leads to something else where it feels very guided by the hand of God. I feel like God uses us. Yeah. And so I try to give him most of the credit, well, all the credit, obviously, to any of this sort of things, because he definitely uses us. He guides us. And what's happening right now, I think, is very biblical. And the fact, again, like you're saying, that it wound up, I finally was able to finish this right at the time with the RICO case. And all of a sudden you're hearing about Brennan and Clapper. And even Comey, Comey has his own little part of the 9/11 station too, which someone was talking to me about on a show I did recently. I have to go back into my notes, but he is a name that didn't come up in my digs, but I'm obviously not surprised to hear that he had a part. I think he was working in the Manhattan DA office or something like that during 9/11. It was had a part in some of the what people would think is the cover up or some of what happened, but don't quote me on that. But all these people are coming up now. Joe Biden, he wrote the draft, the 1995 terrorist omnibus that they pretty much used as the blueprint for the Patriot Act. And it's just such perfect timing. And these people are evil. And they really are. Evil. So I'm happy to pile on.
Well, I do think it's amazing. I definitely think it's guided by the hand of God, because that's what I had meant to connect us to earlier, that scripture. I think that he is using us to be part of the trap that that the wicked are falling in, like when we uncover the trap, they're going to fall into it. And it's just a beautiful thing. And you have done so much work, Brad. When I thought I was trying to just guesstimate how much yesterday I said, okay, he has to have put about 10 hours of research into every data point that you put out there, because there's so much there. And again, the sourcing is incredible. It's what makes it credible, right? Because for people who have so little trust for everything, even though you want to believe it, like you said, you look at these documentaries, they all seem really good. It seems probably true. It resonates, but where are the data points? Where is the sauce? A couple other questions before I let you go. I promised not to hold you hostage for too long, but other connections. You think about this guy, Larry Silverstein, who owned those buildings 1, 2, and 7, as I understand, or maybe he had a 99-year lease or something like that. Yeah. He was a huge real estate guy. He's still alive. Do you know he's still alive?
Yep. Yeah, he's like 99 or something like that, right?
Grok told me 93.
93, okay, yeah.
Do you, what are the chances? I mean, Trump has to know this guy.
Oh, Trump definitely knows him. That world is very small. As far as, there's not even a lot of GCs, but then you go to the actual builders, there's not a lot of them. I'm sure that Trump's probably friends with all of them. I'm sure he was probably very friendly with Silverstein. And I wonder what he thinks in his private thoughts about it. I bet you he's very suspicious, especially as time goes on. You could see the red pilling of Trump over the years. So I would love to be inside his head for a minute and think, I bet you he wonders. But yeah, all those guys, they definitely know each other. It's a very small world. The business world, the construction world in general in New York City, it gets small, even down to us, even down to the workers. How many people you overlap with over the years, where it's small there, but then obviously that's where the subcontracted companies, a lot of times I wound up working for concrete companies, and then you get the GCs like the Bovis Lendlease or Vornado and stuff like that, and then you get the builders like the Trumps and Silversteins. Guarantee you he knows them. I'm sure he's probably been friendly with him and had a good relationship with him. Trump tends to have a good relationship with the people he's works with or rubs elbows with. Whether or not they turn out to be psychos is a different story. That seems to be, I'm sure he's probably sick of that happening. It happens too much. But yeah, he's still alive. And again, I'd love to be in Trump's head to see what he really thinks about him. That would be interesting. I bet you he's very suspicious.
I think he probably is. I think he probably is. Do you think that 9/11 featured in the funeral notes at Bush Sr.'s funeral?
Yes, that is my guess as to what was on those. I think definitely, even right from when it happened, I think says something about that. Yeah.
So fascinating. Yeah. So is your work on this going to continue?
Well, yeah, I do. I have a Substack, and I've been telling people that starting around October, just to give this a little time to breathe, I'm going to start going through some of the digs, right? Because obviously it's something that I have written out. And basically I'm going to start posting some of the script, but then with the links. So physical links so people can use it. One, you could pause the screen, obviously, and find it all. But then also there'll be direct links, and there's some of these things, as we're talking about now, are more sussed out than what I'm actually saying on screen. So I'll get into it more with that. And then, of course, I have a thirst for truth. So I will always be I'm always saving things. It's funny. I just saved a clip yesterday, and not explicitly a 9/11 clip, but Glenn Beck just posted something 2 days ago where he's talking about a meeting where Bush called him in around 2007, 2008, and he was upset at something he said, and he's talking about how he was cursing him up and down. And then at the end, he makes a point. He had said Glenn Beck had made a comment about something Barack Obama said on the campaign trail. And Bush said something to him to the effect of, well, once he gets in here, he's going to have the same people as me advising him. And he's going to see that you have to do X, Y, Z, and he has no choice in the matter. And he says it, his buddy chimes in, because I guess he had called him at the time, and says, and you say that he said that to, I guess, ease Glenn Beck's mind at the end of his berating. But he was like, that was the freakiest part, because that was almost like an admission of the deep state of men in black suits really running the country. And then he goes into talking about things with Trump, and how Trump's like, I'll just call up Vladimir Putin right now. And he was like, we have a president for the first time in probably in the recent future or almost our lives, who isn't being run by these people, who he's running the State Department, not the opposite way around, which is the rarest thing ever. But it's a cool clip, but it is a little insight into that world. And, it's just something I saved. I probably won't do anything with it, but it's just little things like that. Eventually, on my X, I post a lot of stuff. And then in my own shows, I talk about a lot of stuff. But definitely my Substack should start kicking off come around October.
Awesome. Well, drop me those links either in the chat or on X, and I'll make sure they make it into the show notes. But I think those words, I probably won't do anything with it, will probably come back to haunt you, because those kinds of words usually come back to haunt me.
Yeah.
But it does give us such a great appreciation. I mean, looking into the nefarious nature of this, looking into the sheer number of players that had to have some knowledge, maybe just a piece of knowledge. It's astounding to think how many people are really part of that deep state apparatus, and what Trump really is up against, what we as a population have really are up against. Because I think part of this whole awakening thing is every day you wake up a little bit more, and every day you wake up to the realization that there's something else that's been corrupted, some other aspect of your life that you have limited control over, where you in reality you should have total control over, but you don't. Remind me, Brad, where people can watch this. I believe it's on Badlands. That's where I saw it. I don't know if you have it anywhere else.
Perfect. It's on Badlands Media on Rumble, and you can watch it right at the moment. It is the pinned video on the top of our page. I'm also will be tomorrow premiering a 4K version of it on my own channels on Rumble. It's Where We Go When We Go All channel. And
awesome. Tag us in it if you don't mind, and we'll retweet it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that'll be going through tomorrow night. But those will be the two main places. I've also seen people upload it in a lot of other places, so you might run into it anyway, and that's fine. I give it to God with this. If he wants, I made this to get it out there, and so if that happens, it happens. But obviously, I would love you guys to go to the Rumble, either Badlands Media or Where We Go All channel.
Okay. And then where's the best place for people to support your work financially and thank you that way for what you've done?
That's if you go to badlandsmedia.tv/Codex911, there's a page that comes up, and it'll tell you about the movie, but there's also a place to donate on the bottom. So badlandsmedia.tv/Codex911, and there is a link to that as well in the show notes of the two Rumble videos.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Brad. I appreciate you for bearing with me. You got up very early this morning to do this, so thank you so much. Thank you for your research, for your commitment to the truth, and I hope we can have you back on talking about either 9/11 or something else that you're working on.
Amen. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much, and thank you for your dedication to the truth as well.
Well, thank you, Brad. Have a great one.
Take care.
If you're looking to invest in physical precious metals or convert your 401k to a precious metals backed IRA, please consider making your investment with our trusted partner, Metal Stacks. Their prices regularly beat the big sites, and they have no credit card fees or minimums. Shipping is free for orders over $500. Just visit metalstacks.com/dwalker or get there from our website, freedomstate.us. If you're interested in the IRA conversion, drop me a message at Danielle@freedomstate.us and I can get you connected with their white glove service. Thanks for joining me today on For the Love of Freedom. It is an honor and a true privilege to get to spend some time with you. If you're looking for other episodes of this show, you can find them on all of the State of Freedom platforms. And a reminder that this show is live on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Central. God bless. If you're looking to invest in physical precious metals or convert your 401k to a precious metals-backed IRA, please consider making your investment with our trusted partner, MetalStacks. Their prices regularly beat the big sites and they have no credit card fees or minimums. Shipping is free for orders over $500. Just visit metalstacks.com/dwalker or get there from our website, freedomstate.us. If you're interested in the IRA conversion, drop me a message at Danielle@freedomstate.us and I can get you connected with their white glove service. Thanks for joining me today on For the Love of Freedom. It is an honor and a true privilege to get to spend some time with you. If you're looking for other episodes of this show, you can find them on all of the State of Freedom platforms. And a reminder that this show is live on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Central. God bless.